We continue our study in the Gospel of Matthew. We find ourselves in Matthew chapter 28 and one verse, verse 5. I'm going to be reading from the New Testament in modern speech by R.F. Weymouth. But the angel said to the women, "As for you, dismiss your fears. I know it is Jesus that you are looking for, the crucified one." In a way, this verse has a comic undertone. How could the women not be afraid? The ground had been shaking. If they had been close enough to the tomb, and that seems to be the way I read the passage, they had seen and heard what was going on in the tomb. That is, they had seen and heard the commotion, the noise, the rock moving, the lights, It was a show of shows. And to this, we have to put this in the perspective of they were not going to the tomb with the expectation that Jesus was going to be raised from the dead. So to say, dismiss your fears, do not be afraid. Well, that seems kind of like, are you serious? Why wouldn't you be afraid? I don't know about you. I would not be all smiles, all chuckles, and all jovial at that point and at that time. I think on one level, we as believers know what God can do. But on another level, we have not really experienced all that he can do. And I think in that sense, when God works and moves, at times it can be scary because we are taken out of the realm of what we know and are comfortable with to something different. And for these women, it was different, big time. You see, they lacked the personal experience of what they could do. And in this way, were unprepared for what he did. And as a result, were afraid. The great problem for these people, for those people who are of faith, is that our future experience of faith is shaped by our past experience of faith. It is not that we are saying that God can and will only work in certain ways. No, what happens is that our experience of God makes it impossible for us to see God working outside of those parameters. The life of faith, tragic to say, can become petrified as we come to the point where we reject anything that falls outside of those parameters as non-godly. In other words, we come to expect God to work in certain ways. And if God dare works outside of those parameters, that's not God. I'm not saying we need to be gullible to the snake oil salesmen who find, refuge under the roof of our church. There are always going to be those. I'm not saying to be gullible to those people. I am saying that we do need to be careful to not make our experience of God as we experience it now as normative for how God will work and works, in particular in other people's lives. There is a danger there. We all understand that words do not always mean the same thing. There are languages that to native English speakers that are hard to master. And because some words can have more than one, as it were, meaning. What do I mean? In these languages, you can change the meaning of the word by the tone or pitch. So for us as English speakers, we hear the sounds as if the same, but don't pick up on the fact that the tone or pitch can change and therefore change the meaning of the word. And I use that as a rough example or equivalent of what happened to these women. When the angel says, "I know that you are looking for Jesus," we need to understand the tone in which it is said. This is not like someone at the airport information kiosk. giving you directions to the gate you need to board your plane. I know that you are looking for Jesus. Do not be afraid. I don't think it was kind of like that. I think it was said in such a way that when they heard it, they knew they had a friend. They knew that this angel was of God. In that moment, there is a wave of comfort coming over these women. Now, notice, that did not mean that they understood everything, grasped everything. It means that they knew that they were in the midst of God, and God was in the midst of the situation. If you've been in church a number of years, you know how the voice of God can be manipulated. If you have been involved in Christian organizations a number of years, you will have people over the years laying claim to speaking God's voice. The point is that God does speak to his people. Now, that does not mean he always speaks in the same way. There is only one burning bush experience, and in that sense, only one Damascus Road experience. You see, it is easy to know when God is speaking if we make only certain experiences or events count. What we need to do and what we must do is learn to listen to God, be it through prayer or Bible reading. Why do we need to cultivate that? We need to do it so that when God does speak, we can hear. If God speaks in ways that are non approved, ways that we would not consider normal and routine. You see, I'm saying to you, in effect, that when that angel spoke, these women knew it was of God. How did they know it was of God? Well, think about it. They had learned to hear God's voice in some way, shape, or form in the prior days and years of their lives to this moment. They had learned to hear the voice of God. So when God shows up and speaks in a way that they were not used to, they didn't get focused on the fact that this is not how God is to speak. They were able to hear the voice of God in the midst of all the confusion and uncertainty of that moment. The women heard God not because they practiced listening to angels, but because they had learned to listen to the voice of God. If they had not learned to listen to the voice of God and discern that voice of God in their prior lives, well, so to speak, they would have been heading to the exits when the angel began to speak.